While the Freemasons in Britain claimed that Kenya was a colony of the Imperial British East African Company, they ignore the fact that it was a slave trading company, established by the British Freemasons and operated in East Africa as the umbrella body for slave traders. Queen Victoria and the Allied European governments joined the Prester John in his wars against slave trade. The Prester John's chief opponents were the likes of the Irishman, Henry Morton Stanley. He arrived in Africa, Bombay, and worked briefly for King Leopold of Belgium. He later joined the Lakes Africa Company and began to lead slave hunting missions. Lakes Africa Company was one of the Scottish slave trading companies that joined to form the Imperial British East Africa Company. In 1880, the Lord Cromer, the Prester John's Egyptian viceroy, Sir Evelyn Baring established a protectorate administration in Egypt. In 1888, the Freemasons were defeated and ejected from Zanzibar, and the Viceroy's secretary, Gerald Portal, established a branch of the Protectorate administration in Zanzibar. In 1892 the Freemasons were defeated and evicted from Uganda. Gerald Portal appointed Kasagama of Toro as the replacement for Kabarega of Bunyoro. He died before establishing Protectorate administration in Uganda, his successor did. Arthur Hardinge succeeded Portal as the secretary of the Viceroy. He became the second commissioner of the East African Protectorate after Gerald Portal, and moved the administrative headquarters of the East African Protectorate from Zanzibar to Mombasa. The historical background of the East African Protectorate and that of the Kenya colony are completely different, and so are their destiny. In 1963, the Freemasons made Kenyatta their prime minister, after they declared Kenya's independence, but still no head of state. Meanwhile, Malcolm MacDonald was acting as the head of state the Protectorate since the King's heir not officially assumed his position. The Irish and other Jesuit Catholic colonists in East Africa took the sun as their symbol. The Scottish industrial missions took the mountain as they belonged to William Montagu's faction of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem. This the British branch of the French Montagnards. The Jesuit Catholics and the Scottish Protestants claimed that East Africa was a colony of the Imperial British East African Company. After their defeat in the Mau Mau War, they declared self-rule and later independence in the colony. Oginga, who now ruled as king in the Jesuit Kavirondo colony, joined Kenyatta, and they began to push for unification of the colony and the Protectorate. This led to the creation of the Republic of Kenya in 1964. The Kenya colony was declared in 1920, after the disbandment of the Uganda scheme. Initially, the regions of the Uganda scheme were administered by religious organizations. The administrators working for the religious organizations overstepped their mandate, and tried to reintroduce slavery in the natives. This led to the disbandment of the Uganda scheme. Consequently, the Protectorate assumed direct administration of the colony. The British government representatives in the Protectorate administration worked closely with the members of Prester John's cabinet, and their representatives. Since both the Protectorate and the colony were within the Prester John's territory as the colony was a region in the East African Protectorate, the British government could not claim it as their own, and so the British Parliament could not administrate on behalf of the East African Protectorate and the colony. The individuals governing the Republic now claim that the Protectorate became obsolete in 1920 following the disbandment of the Uganda scheme and the declaration of colony, and that the British government administered Kenya as a colony. The White Paper 1923, prepared by Lord Devonshire Victor Cavendish, who recorded the cabinet resolution concerning the Indian question, state that the British government operated in the territories of the Prester John as protectors and trustees, whose responsibility was to spearhead the advancement of native populations. This order addressed the imperialists' claims and clarified the British government's position concerning the status of the subjects of the squatters in colony. They were subjects of the imperialists who claimed that their settlements in the colony would be part of the Indian Empire. Such populations include the Nubians, Gujaratis, Bajuni, Punjabi. Others such as Dorobo, Lumwa, Kwavi and Makonde among others, were brought from the southern Africa by the Afrikaners. The Kwavi and Dorobo, now called Maasai, came from the Namakwa. The Makonde are part of the Zanj or the Zanjba referred to as the Bakwizi. The Zanjba came from the southern islands in the Indian Ocean. The Lumwa, now called Kipsigis, are a branch of the Saniaka. The Saniaka came from the Nubians or Bengala, traditionally referred to as the Songye in Central Africa. The Saniaka who remained closer to shores of Lake Victoria were called Kosova or Kisi. Those who move east became the Lumwa, while those settled in the north became the Gisho or Uasin Gisho. The northerners include the Bukusu, Tiriki, Sabayat among other so-called Kalenjins of Bungoma, Mount Elgin and Transoya. Others include the Nyangori, Batsitso and Isuka, of Kisumu Kakamega and Nandi. The squatters' arrival in the region is documented, and so they are not considered native populations. For instance, the Nandi arrived in Kenya, in the company of William Hobley, in 1895 as fighters of the Imperial British Army, and not a native tribe. They came from a place called Nandi in Bangla, South India. Other Namaqua populations of southern Africa were also brought from the same region by the Dutch VOC. When the Afrikaners established ranches in the Rift Valley, they brought the Namaqua or Wakwavi with them and settled them alongside the Nandi. All these Bangla populations of the Rift Valley were previously called Wakwafi, or known by the acronym, Kamatusa. The interests of the natives were prioritized above those of the squatters. The natives include groups such as the Luos, a section of the Luya, parts of Kisi, a section of Wakamba and Kikuyus known as the Henga and the Wanyika among others. In the coastal regions, the Giriama and Pokomo belong to the Bajuni. Besides the Bangla of Rift Valley, the Kavirondo of Nyanza and Western are also squatters, who were resettled among the native Luo and Wanga in the 1920s. Luo-speaking Kavirondo include clans that previously supported Okumu Ogata of Kanyamwa, and they claim to be descendants of Amwa. In earlier records, the non-Luos of Kanyamwa were identified as a faction of the Bahima, hence called Kanyambo. Most of the Luo-speaking Kavirondo came from the Anwak of Ethiopia and Acholi of Uganda. They mingled with the Bangla and raised a race called Hima or Himba, locally known as Amwa or Omia. The Amwa are cousins of the Lang, Luo-speaking natives with close relations to the Anjiwa and the Axioli. Likewise, the Himba of Namibia emerged as a result of intermingling between the Namaqua Hereros and the native Ndongos from Uktera. The Ndongos are originally Luo speakers. In southern Africa, the Ndongos are called Ambo. Oginga Odinga Rossett ate as a champion of Kavirondo affairs in the Masino CMS station, between 1940 and 1942. Jokavirondo made Oginga, Care, of North Kavirondo at Gem Lunda in 1947. After leaving the job at the Masino station in 1945, he became chairman of the Kavirondo movement, known as the North Kavirondo Local Native Council. He was joined by a group of traders in the cabinet of the Prester John Albert, known as Jaramogi. The Luos referred to the Prester John as Ramogi, and his cabinet as Jaramogi. The Prester John Albert died in 1940. Oginga Odinga became leader of the Kavirondo of Bondo in 1945, and led a movement known as the Bondo Thrift. In 1952, a section of Jaramogi recognized Oginga as king. Those who rejected Oginga, likes of Ambrose Ofafa, were killed. Oginga had been imposed on the Luos by the Irish Catholics of Kavirondo. Oginga and the traders created the so-called Luo Council, the governing body of the Luo Union. The Luo Council replaced Jaramogi, and established their seat at Ofafa Memorial Hall in Kisumu, named after the slain leader of Jaramogi. After he was made chairman of the Luo Council in 1952, Oginga began to refer to himself as Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. His chief accomplice, Akieng Oniko, also claimed the title of Ramogi.